So Noel said he'd be joining us again presently because he's going to respond to the findings from our next presentation, because there was a supplier survey commissioned, as Noel referred to there, and Coyne Research carried out that detailed research and survey, and I'm delighted to say that the Managing Director of Coyne Research, Bernie Coyne, is here now to go through the findings. Bernie, over to you.
Okay, can you see those two? Oh, the lights are going to go down. Noel is taking you through the background, so I'm not going to go through that text. Basically, our objective was to measure awareness of these UTP regulations to inform the enforcement authority about what were the concerns with UTP amongst the agri-food suppliers. So what we did is two different surveys. One was the primary producer survey. I know there's a lot of people here. I saw the IFA, I met a man from the IFA. So the primary producers was one of the surveys, and then the other was the supplier survey. What do you say, Nathan? Oh, yeah, the mic. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so the primary producers, the enforcement authority sent out the email. It was an online completed survey. So it was in a link, it was sent via text, it was put on the website. They used their partners to help get a response rate. We got a phenomenal response rate of over 3,213 primary producers. And that produces a margin of error about 1.8%. So it's a really robust sample size. So all of the data you see here, it's either plus 1.8% or minus 1.8%. And it was a short survey of about 10 minutes. So first of all, what were the main buyers of the agricultural products for these primary producers? So meat processor featured quite prominently there. You can see just under half, dairy, cooperative. And then when we asked them what sector they operate in, over half of them operated in the beef sector, followed by dairy, followed by sheep. So that's the profile. It's a good representative sample of primary producers in Ireland. So one of the key questions were, have you heard of the UTP regulations? And when we asked that, 1 in 2 primary producers had heard of them. And then when we said, what's your understanding? You can see that the main understanding is they protect against unfair trading practices, they protect farmers, farming organisations, and then we had 1 in 5 there that just heard of the name, that didn't know anything else. So then we went on, we prompted them with a little bit more information. So the next question said, do you know that you've got protection against 16 specific trading practices? So in that case, it dropped down to just 14% said that they were aware of that. And then we gave them a little bit more information where we talked about, are you aware that it's protection for the weaker suppliers against the stronger suppliers? And then the 14% awareness went up to 24. So that's 1 in 4 primary producers, when we gave them that information, said they'd heard of it. Then we went on and we asked everybody this. It didn't matter whether you're aware or not aware. We gave them an example. Look, a supplier with an annual turnover of less than 2 million is protected against a buyer with a turnover of more than 2 million. And then we said, how confident do you feel about that in terms of protection and the regulations? And disappointingly, we'd 6 in 10 primary producers, not dissimilar to the poll that Damien did earlier here, but with 6 in 10 that said they weren't very confident. So clearly, an education deficit there. Then we went on to show them, so Noel talked about the black UTPs, the grey UTPs, so we actually listed out these UTPs on the survey. They were all listed out in full detail, and we asked people, have you experienced a black UTP in the last 2 years or a grey UTP in the last 2 years? So in total, amongst the primary producers, and I'll come on to the suppliers, but 1 in 4 primary producers had, in the last 2 years, a black UTP or a grey UTP. Now, they're the black UTPs. I know there's a lot to read there, but in total, it's 24% on the black UTPs, so 1 in 4. I'm sure you're all familiar with the black UTPs, and you've read that leaflet in detail, so you know them, so I'm not going to go through it. But they're the black UTPs. They're all very small. I'll show you the suppliers now in a bit. And these are the grey UTPs, so very small, only 6%. And you wouldn't be surprised here, because the grey UTPs is a lot to do with marketing and promotion and advertising. So these are primary producers. They're not necessarily, at the front face. So that's the 6%. So in total, 1 in 4, either a black or a grey UTP. So we went on to ask just those 25%, what was the cost of the black UTP, the grey UTP? So the average cost is 3.3%. So that's taken across all of them. But I would note that 40% of these people that experienced these UTPs, they didn't know, they couldn't estimate the cost. And then when you look at the cost by the various sectors, it's higher in the cereal, poultry and the beef sector, the perceived cost. And then at the end, so it's the same sequence of questions, after we've gone through this. We've prompted them, we've told them what's involved, etc. And then we said, how do you feel about the position of weaker suppliers? Is it strengthened against the buyers? And you can see it's a little bit more positive here. You've got 3 in 10 that say, yes, I do believe these regulations have strengthened things, but we still have 19% or 1 in 5 that are still a little bit negative. That was asked of everybody. It didn't matter whether you'd experienced a UTP, you were aware of it, whatever. So this is interesting. When I saw Noel, the number of complaints that have been made since 2022. So when we asked, these are the people who had experienced a black UTP or a grey UTP, have you contacted anyone? Did you reach out, talk to anybody? We'd only 3 in 10 that had contacted the buyer. Half of them had made some sort of contact. And then when we look at the success or their perceived rating of the success of that contact, it wasn't very successful. Only 15% of primary producers, I'm going to talk about the suppliers, primary producers said it was as successful. And then we asked the 50%, why didn't you reach out? Why didn't you complain? Why didn't you say something? They said it's not common practice in the sector. Half of them said it's just not what you do. And then there was fear of retaliation. 1 in 4 talked about getting retaliation from the buyer, and they didn't know who the authority was, or they didn't think the authority would be able to do anything. So they're the barriers to actually reaching out and using the regulations, etc. So now I'm going to move on to the Downstream Supplier Survey. This is our business-to-business survey. So we've finished with the primary producers. So the methodology here was different. It was Katie, so that's computer-aided telephone interviewing. So how we started off is we bought an independent database of all these agri-food suppliers, and then we supplemented it with the board BIA. We went on to various websites to try and populate this database to get us a comprehensive list of downstream suppliers within all the categories. So this would have been, we would have been given the categories by Noel, Aidan, etc., and made sure that we'd an adequate representative, number of businesses in them. So in total, we did a 200 sample survey. Again, it was about 10, 12 minutes, very similar questions to what you've seen already. So to start off with, if we just look at the profile of these business-to-business suppliers. So when we asked them what is the stage of the supply chain that they operate in, over half of them are primary processing, followed by secondary further processing or trader or wholesaler. And then again, a sector question, what sector are they in? Food, horticulture, beverages, confectionery, seafood, dairy, cereals, pig meat. So full range there of all the various types of businesses. This is still looking at a profile. What is their turnover? So almost 9 in 10 were under 10 million, but you can see the vast majority are in this less than 2 million. So 63%, 2/3 are less than 2 million. So these are smaller suppliers, exactly what the key target is. The exact same question, and we got the exact same result. Have you heard of the UTP regulations? And it's just ironic that we've 1 and 2 of these suppliers that said yes, they had. But interesting, when we asked them the understanding of the UTP regulations, just under half of them just heard of the name. So they really don't know what, they've heard of it, but they don't know the detail behind it. We did a 4 in 10 that said, look, they protect against unfair trading practice, but that's a very literal explanation of what the UTP regulations do. So there's a lack of education out there amongst these B2B suppliers. So the same question sequences you would have seen in the earlier. So we give them a little bit more information. We said, are you aware that the UTP protect against 16 specific regulations? You saw it was like 14% with the primary producers. It's 19% or 1 in 5 here with the suppliers. And then we give them a bit more information. It's the weaker versus the stronger. Are you aware? And that rose to 29%. And then when we look at the black UTPs, grey UTPs, the exact same list. Have you experienced a black UTP in the last 12 months, or last 2 years? Have you experienced a grey UTP? So when we combine everybody that had experienced either a black or a grey, it amounts to 53% of these suppliers. So 1 in 2 suppliers, it was a black or a grey UTP. And if you look at the black, which is a complete from Noel, isn't it? Completely a no-no, the black UTPs, we had 49%, so half of them, the vast majority who've experienced any sort of a UTP, it's a black UTP. And you can see the top 2 there to do with payment terms. So not being paid within 30 days, not being paid within 60 days are the top 2 UTPs that they've experienced. And then it goes down to short notice cancellations of products, risk of loss, deterioration, transfer to the supplier, unilateral contract changes. So much higher instance versus the primary producer survey here of these black UTPs. Now the grey UTPs, it's smaller, but they are front facing. So we do have 3 in 10 suppliers that also nominated a black UTP. So you can see there's a lot of overlap between the black and the grey UTP. And the main ones here is that the buyer doesn't pay for unsold products, doesn't pay for promotion, marketing, advertising. Then the cost to business. So we saw for the primary producers it was 3.3%. Here it's significantly smaller, it's 1.6%. You still have a chunk of people that don't know, 1 in 5 don't know, but overwhelmingly big proportion there, 43% said it was just 0.5%. So I think if we go back to what UTPs that have been breached, it's payment. So it's probably difficult to put a number on what is the cost of not being paid in 30 days, not being paid in 60 days, you know, just like a hidden cost as such. Did you raise the issue with any operators or bodies? We have the exact same pattern here that we saw with the primary producers. Only 1 in 2 raised the issue, and it was predominantly with the buyer, bearing in mind where they are in the supply chain. That's not surprising. However, what we do see with the businesses is that they have a much higher success rate. So, 40% of them said they were successful raising the issue with the buyer, where only 34% were not successful. So the primary producers had a much higher unsuccessful rate. And then why did you not raise the issue? So we asked the exact same question of these as we did the primary producers, and it's to do with fear of retaliation from the buyer. It's not common practice. They don't think the competent authority would be able to do anything about it, and that, or that they're not a member of a representative body. But the key one is that it's not common practice, and I'm going to get punished. If I do this, I'll get punished. Then same question where we said, look, at wrapping this all up, how do you feel, about the position of these weaker suppliers? Does the UTP regulations, does it strengthen or does it weaken? And here you've got 1 in 4 optimistic. You've got a big chunk of these business-to-business suppliers sitting in the middle. That's not surprising, given go back to the awareness. They're not sure what it's all about. 44% of them just know the name, so they don't know the details. So they're not negative, but they're just waiting to be convinced. And that's just the insights. I mean, I'm sure you've got all of these, but we saw that you'd 1 in 2 that have heard of the UTP regulations, and ironically that was the same for both the suppliers and the primary producers. And then we went in, we gave them a little bit more information. You had like 14% of the primary producers that knew that there was protection against the 16 specific UTPs. That was higher amongst the B2B, it was 19%. And then when we get into the UTPs, you had half of the businesses that were subjected to a grey or a black UTP versus 1 in 4 of the primary producers. And then right down the bottom, but they're both the exact same. Only half of them had reached out and contacted a buyer, contacted an organisation, and the barriers to making contact is fear of retaliation. What was the other one? I'm after having a brain freeze. Fear of retaliation, and it's not common practice in the industry. So that's it, Damien.
Okay, Bernie, thanks very much.
It's probably quicker.
No, you're great. Thank you very much indeed. That's a very detailed survey. And I see a lot of you are taking snapshots and taking notes there, but it will be up on the website, utp.gov.ie. That will be published, I think, around just once the seminar finishes at around 10:30, so you'll be able to go through it in great detail. We're going to go to our second Slido question now for people that are tuned in online, and I think the survey there certainly highlighted something that I think the farmers and small suppliers in this audience are very familiar with, and that is obviously reasons why suppliers don't make complaints about buyers. So our second question is, do you understand the reluctance of suppliers to make complaints about buyers? So we have 30 seconds online, and I'll bring you the result of that a little bit later on.